So this is another set of slides to survey two more groups of Refuseniks called New Profile and Shministim. A very famous Refusnik from the Lebanon War, a member of Yeshkvul, Eli Geva, spoke about the differences between themselves and the Shministim and New Profile. And he stated recently, a new nonconformist generation has emerged in the Israeli left. The problem of my generation was conformism. The new generation of Refuseniks, the Shministim and New Profile, is much more anti-conformist than us. So these are the youngest among the Refuseniks that we will be looking at. And the first group that I would like to introduce and discuss with you is called New Profile. The subtitle, let's say, for New Profile is the movement to demilitarize Israeli society. This was established in 1998, and I'm reading from the website. New Profile is a group of feminist women and men who are convinced that we need not live in a soldier's state. Today, Israel is capable of a determined peace politics. It need not be a militarized society. We are convinced that we ourselves, our children, our partners, need not go on being endlessly mobilized, need not go on living as warriors. And this is, the statement stands in stark contrast to the history of many generations that preceded New Profile and these last arrivals, let's say, among the Refuseniks. If you remember the speech of Moshe Dayan in 1956 on the grave or at the funeral of Roy Rothberg, the speech that I quoted, I believe, in the very first slides introducing, maybe in the first video introducing this unit, Moshe Dayan said, roughly I'm quoting by heart, our generation is a generation of workers that were forced to take the helmet. We wanted to live by the plow, but we're living with weapons, with the steel. So this is a complete turn of perspective also vis-a-vis the previous Refuseniks that we've seen, the Courage to Refuse group, which instead emphasized again their loyalty to the state through the militaristic ethos. While here we have a clear rejection of the Israel government's military-only option for resolving the regional conflict, and also a denunciation of the social and cultural consequences of such political choice, and one would also add of the economical consequences of such a political choice. This is an element that we will find again with the next group, the Shministim. What is important of New Profile is the refusal, the rejection of this movement of the code of warrior heroism and the notion image of the soldier peacemaker. In fact, this images of Israeli soldiers are as moral, the Israeli army is a moral army and eventually as a peacemaker. If you go on the website of New Profile, you will find a very interesting presentation with slides entitled Making Militarism Visible. And the idea of this movement and of this presentation is to eventually make emerge how militarized Israeli society is, both in, if you look at education, or if you look at advertising, or if you look at other aspects of civilian life, and in the same way to denounce the gender roles that have been defined by nationalism and militarism. So in a way we find here a rejection of the close link between the army and civilian life on the one hand, and between the army and political life as well. New Profile intervenes in the field of education with conferences, lectures, and visits to the school. and they extend very broad support for army conscripts, especially women who refuse to be recruited. Now, if we continue to the next group, the Shministim, we have a similar approach. For example, in the refusal to manipulate the symbolic meanings of the nationalist, militarist and patriotic discourse, which is what instead was going on with Courage to Refuse, and also, for example, in the pilot's letter that I didn't read out to you, but you can easily find on internet. Shministim as a group was established in 2001, and here we can read together the letter that they drafted and sent to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in August 2001. So we are 1 year into the second Intifada, a particularly dramatic time for Israelis given the suicide attacks from certain groups of Palestinian terrorists. And so it is indeed a very difficult moment for a group to start a new movement of Refuseniks. So the letter to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon read as follows. We, the undersigned, youths who grew up and were brought up in Israel, are about to be called to serve in the IDF. We protest before you against the aggressive and racist policy pursued by the Israeli government and its army, and to inform you that we do not intend to take part in the execution of this policy. We strongly resist Israel's pounding of human rights, land expropriation, arrest, executions without trial, house demolition, closure, torture, and the prevention of health care. Some of the crimes the State of Israel carries out in blunt violation of international conventions it has ratified. These actions are not only illegitimate, they do not even achieve their stated goal, increasing the citizens' personal safety. Such safety will be achieved only through a just peace agreement between the Israeli government and the Palestinian people. Therefore, we will obey our conscience and refuse to take part in acts of oppression against the Palestinian people, acts that should properly be called terrorist actions. We call upon persons our age, conscript, soldiers in the standing army, and reserve service soldiers to do the same. There were a few who signed the letter to Prime Minister Sharon in August 2001. 2 years later, there were 500 Shministim, and as I speak now in 2015, that number has at least doubled. So we can see the radicalism of this critique, for example, this is the first movement that does not hesitate to call terrorist actions the policy of the Israeli government, in a reversal of perspective that, as I'm saying, during the Second Intifada must have sounded particularly radical and harsh. And this criticism actually went even further a few years ago in 2005, when in a new letter the movement established a very clear connection between maintaining the occupation and the deterioration of the economic situation in Israel and the social welfare and the social well-being of its citizens. So the letter of 2005 said, the occupation has corrupted Israel, turning it into a militaristic, racist, chauvinistic, and violent society. Israel is wasting its resources on the perpetuation of the occupation and repression in the territories, while hundreds of thousands of Israelis live in shameful poverty. In recent years, Israeli citizens have experienced a deterioration of all public services, education, medicine, welfare, pensions, everything to do with the well-being of the citizenry has been neglected and sacrificed for the continued existence of settlements which the majority of the population wishes to be evacuated. We cannot stand idly facing this situation, which amounts to a targeted liquidation of the principle of equality. We wish to live in a society which pursues justice, upholding equal rights to every single citizen. The occupation and repression policy is an obstacle to the realization of this vision. Therefore, we shall refuse to take part in it. We wish to contribute to society in an alternative way, which does not involve harming other human beings. So what is obvious is that these are total objectors, and that their objection is based on a pacifist outlook and on an anti-militaristic approach. I've stressed over and over that most Israeli movements or activists that we have been talking about were not really pacifist, but rather peace movements or peace activists. According to the distinction that Tamara Herman made in her book, which I've quoted in the introductory presentations to this course, these, on the contrary, are not peace movement. This is not a peace movement, but a pacifist and anti-militaristic movement, and that's because. The reason why selective refusal doesn't work here is because the Shministim perceive that every role inside the army is one of the rings in the chain of the occupation, is one of the elements that allows occupation or helps the occupation continue directly or indirectly. And so in a way, they, following somehow the vision of New Profile, they define the duty of a citizens not in military but in civilian terms. And in this respect, they consider selective refusal to play into the legitimation of the mainstream. In the words of Matan Kaminer, one of the Shministim, he said, "I don't think it's much more effective than, say, any other anti-occupation work that's being done, but it's part of the process. The strength of refusal is that it's a direct action, even by the fact of its being a non-action. It's non-cooperation, it's disobedience. The occupation can't exist if it's not supported by Israeli society, whether that is by the soldiers themselves, whether that is by the community that sends them, whether that is by our tax shekels. And refusal is a big part of ending that." So paradoxically or interestingly, these words of the new century echo those of the very first objectors that we have seen, those of the 1950s, who also were not selective refusers, they were total refusers. They also went for a fiscal strike, and they were different in the sense that they insisted on doing a civilian service instead. But these two, this citation of Kaminer and the very first words of the objectors in the 50s echo somehow one another. In your list of links, I have placed many very brief TV interviews or TV videos under the title of Social TV. We will return on Social TV as an organization in week number 5, I believe, when we will be talking about media and peace building. But those that I have posted in this list of links are actually demonstrations of older conscientious objectors, or Refuseniks to be more precise, those who belong to Yesh Gvul, for example, who are now supporting and are demonstrating in order to support the Shministim who have been jailed, as that is the consequence that many of them many of them endured. So imprisonment and serving several terms of prison is one of the consequences of total conscientious objection, as well as of partial conscientious objection in Israel. And I encourage you also to listen to the speech, if you like, of Omer Goldman Granot, a member of the Shministim, because of what she says, and because of her family history, which made her one of the stars of the movement. Shministims conduct tours in universities and in schools, and very often are called to tell about their experience and their vision in educational institutions. So, having seen the Shministims, I'll now move on to another group of Refuseniks. See you there. Thank you.